Good morning, everyone. It is Tuesday, January the 26th, 2021. It is currently 10:24 a.m. Central Time, and I'm coming to you live from Victory Baptist Church located here in Ovalo, Texas. Now, if you missed part one, it's not really labeled part one, but if you missed the first live broadcast and this discussion about Romans 13, please go back and listen to the first broadcast. The reason why is I spent 30 minutes establishing really the foundation that I'm going to stand on as I continue this discussion and as we continue to listen to this sermon on Romans chapter 13, and we try to analyze it and we try to take it apart. The foundation I established in the first message is critical because that's the foundation I'm going to be standing on. And if you don't get that foundation, then you're going to misinterpret and misunderstand everything I'm saying. I will briefly repeat my kind of the way I'm approaching this because because I want you to at least have some idea of the way I am thinking and how and the way I'm trying to look at this and the way I'm analyzing this and reviewing this. All right. So let me establish something I'm just going to establish some very basic points here, and then we'll jump right back into this sermon that we're listening to. I'm not here to give you the name of this ministry. I'm not here to give you the name of the church because this is not about personalities or persons or ministries. It's not about me against them. It has nothing to do with that. The reason we are looking at this sermon is because it has everything to do with a deeper and more important issue. And this is the issue. And I started the last broadcast by basically putting this in a question form. When you open up your Bible, are you opening up your Bible to discover God's way, God's word, God's will, and then seek to follow it? Or are you simply opening the Bible to find your way, your will, and justification for the way you already are thinking? Do you have a tendency to open up the Bible and in a sense shove your way, your will, your words into the scriptures, and then you have a scriptural justification for thinking your way, for going your way? No, scripture is saying that I can do this. Scripture is saying that how I'm thinking is right. Now, it's no Christian is going to immediately say, yes, that's what I do. I open up God's word to find my way. No Christian will say that, but you have to ask yourself if that is possible, that you have a tendency to do that. And I believe we all have a tendency to do that because when we read the Bible in regards to the sinful nature, our depraved nature, because we have a depraved nature, we are prone to do this. Because listen, this is very important. Because we have a depraved nature, our heart is desperately wicked and deceitful above all things. We can deceive ourselves into thinking that, no, I'm following God's way. I'm following God's word. Just think of how the religious leaders dealt with Jesus. They would have told you that they're trying to follow God's word. They would have told you they're trying to follow God's way, and they ultimately end up wanting the eternal Son of God crucified and killed. They rejected his word and his way because ultimately they convinced themselves that they were following God's word and God's way, but they ultimately wanted their way and their word. We have a tendency to shove our words into the mouth of God so that then he can repeat them back so that we can say, look, I have justification. I'm scripturally justified in doing what I'm doing and thinking the way I'm thinking. The Bible agrees with me. And whenever we are simply wanting the Bible to agree with us, we're in trouble. When we try to make God agree with us instead of us repenting so that we can be in agreement with God, we are in trouble. I also use this illustration. We're fine with God when he says, of every tree of the garden you can freely eat. We're like, amen, we're all for it. But when God says, but of this one tree you cannot eat, because in the day you do, you are going to die. All of a sudden we're like, wait a minute, time out. And so we go and we look at the tree that we can't now partake of. And then we sit there and we start having a conversation. And the next thing you know, we tell ourselves, God didn't really mean that. God didn't really say that in the day we eat of this, we're going to die. And the next thing you know, we convince ourselves that God didn't really mean what he said. And then we change what he says, and then we do what we want. And then the next thing you know, we find ourselves in all kinds of trouble. So I'm looking at this more in light. I'm looking at this whole discussion about Romans 13 more in that light. Is Romans 13 now this passage where there's all of this controversy and all of this debate? Is it controversial and a debatable text now because now we are confronted with a situation where things may not go our way? Things are going to be difficult for us, and so we don't like what Romans 13 appears to be saying. So we're going to change what Romans 13 says so that ultimately we can do what we want and get our way. Is that what is happening? All right. So I spent 30 minutes talking about that, trying to give you every kind of illustration to get that point across. That is the foundation. That is the basis of everything we're getting ready to talk about. We're listening to a sermon that was recently preached on Romans 13. A listener sent me this sermon. And we're taking it apart. All right. Now, he's already said a number of things. I'm not going to go back and review everything. I have backed up the audio just about 10, 15 seconds, and he's getting ready to read the text, and we're going to see where he's going to go. So we're asking ourselves, is this an example of someone preaching Romans 13 to find out what God says and then challenging everyone to obey what God says? Or is this a sermon where someone doesn't like what Romans 13 appears to be saying in light of our current circumstances and is going to change Romans 13 so that we now can do what we want? What is the reality here? What we're going to have to see, and we're going to look at it. So are you ready? Let's just jump right back in. I feel like I need to spend more time going through this basic principle that I'm operating from, but I'm hoping everyone gets it. I hope everyone gets it. So let's just jump right in. If you missed part one, then you need to go back and listen. But here we go. We back this up just a few seconds, and we're going to let this lead us right back into this discussion. So here we go.
And yet, here we are, and we all know why we're here. Let's read these texts together. Romans chapter 13. Again, always remember where a text is in the argument of a book. You have had the great theology of what God is doing in the world. In the first few chapters, you have the doctrine of sin being laid out, the great need coming to a climax in Romans chapter 3, and then God's meeting that need in the halfway point of chapter 3, and then explicating that in the relationship of grace and faith in Romans 4 into Romans 5, and then the federal headship of Adam and how we live in light of that in Romans 6 and 7, reaching the crescendo in Romans chapter 8, and the great section there that leads to the golden chain of redemption. And then the question of the Jews comes up. Well, what about them? Does their unfaithfulness then make God's faithfulness unfaithfulness? And so you have the discussion in Romans 9 and 10 and 11. And then once the great theology is finished in chapter 12, you now have application. The application of what all this means as to how we live in this world. And so chapter 12 begins that, and then chapter 13. How, in these first few verses, do we live in light of the fact that we live in this world where God has ordained government, but all sorts of different kinds of government?
Now stop right here. Just remember the historical context, I got to remind you, is Nero. Nero, basically the backdrop is about 10 years of murder, adultery, and all kinds of just horrible, corrupt things have taken place. In fact, let me just read the exact words from an article that provided the historical context for Romans 13. Let me just remind you I read this in part one. Let me just remind you again. It was around this time, and they had just outlined all the things Nero had been doing, with the backdrop of 10 years of murder, adultery, injustices, that's the word I couldn't remember, injustices by the rulers of the Roman Empire, that the Christians in Rome received a letter from the Apostle Paul which said in part, hey, subject yourselves to the authority. Remember, 10 years of murder, adulteries, and injustices by the rulers of the Roman Empire. And then what do they get? They get a letter from Paul that, yes, talks about human depravity, yes, talks about salvation, and then tells them, here's how you live out the truth of this theology in the setting in which you find yourself. You find yourself in the midst of a corrupt government that's doing unjust and horrible and immoral things. Here's what I'm calling you to do. All right. Now, how does that apply to us? All right. We'll see what he's going to do with this. Here we go.
Romans chapter 13, verse 1. Let everyone or every person be in subjection to the authorities above, literally. Now, I will mention something. I'm not going to get into a bunch of the Greek and grammar today. I want to try to stay away from that, leave that till Tuesday, to be honest with you. But translated by the New American Standard as governing authorities. But I do want to mention another possible understanding of that as we get into that. But let every person be in subjection to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Therefore, he who resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For it is a minister of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath upon those who practice evil. Wherefore it is necessary to be in subjection, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience's sake. For because of this you also pay taxes, for rulers are servants of God, devoting themselves to this very thing. Render to all what is due them, tax to whom tax is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. And then please note something. Owe nothing to anyone except to love one another, for he who loves his neighbor has fulfilled the law. For this, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet. And if there is any other commandment, it is summed up in this saying, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Love, therefore, is the fulfillment of the law. This comes immediately after an almost full repetition of what the law says as to how we are to be related to one another is placed before us by the apostle in verses 9 and following. Keep that in mind. It will become important to us. Turn with me over to 1 Peter chapter 2. Similar issue here. Peter is addressing believers as to how they're to live this life in this world. Normally, an examination would begin in chapter 2, verse 13. I want to back us up one verse. Verse 12. Keep your behavior excellent among the Gentiles, so that in the thing in which they slander you as evildoers, they may, on account of your good deeds, as they observe them, glorify God in the day of visitation. So please notice that Peter is well aware that there is external opposition. There is, in fact, slander of believers as evildoers. But we are to keep our behavior excellent among them, so that in the thing in which they slander you as evildoers, they may, on account of your good deeds, as they observe them, glorify God in the day of visitation. That may not be immediately, but in the day of visitation. That's the context. Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether to a king as the one in authority or to governors as sent by him, for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right. For such is the will of God, that by doing right you may silence the ignorance of foolish men. Act as free men, and do not use your freedom as a covering for evil, but use it as bond slaves of God. Honor all men, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. Don't stop there. Servants, and that is the term douloi, which in the Roman Empire meant slaves. Slaves, be submissive to your masters with all respect, not only to those who are good and gentle, but also to those who are unreasonable. For this finds favor if for the sake of conscience toward God a man bears up under sorrows when suffering unjustly. For what credit is there if when you sin and are harshly treated you endure it with patience? But if when you do what is right and suffer for it, you patiently endure it, this finds favor with God. Always reading the text in its context, especially remembering the context of the ancient church. So let us turn back to Romans chapter 13. How are we to understand these words? And especially as we live in a day that in some ways is bringing us back to where the church was when these words were first written.
Now stop right here. All right. First, how do we understand these words? Of all the words in the New Testament that seem to be so clear, these are pretty clear what to do. Submit. Submit. Now, there are some issues there that you have to work out, but there's no question it's the clear. Remember in the last broadcast, I played those words from John MacArthur in April of 2020 when he's like, how do we respond to the pandemic? The clear teaching is that we submit ourselves to the government. That's the clear teaching. All right. Now, but so that already was like, well, how do we understand this? It's almost like he's approaching the text now. Look, these are some complicated words. How do we figure this out? Okay, why is it difficult to figure out? Well, it's difficult to figure out because now circumstances, according to him, seems to be changing. And he's now saying that we are finding ourselves somewhat in a similar situation to the early church. Okay, now, I've really got to stop here and go, wait a minute. Okay, I got to really think this through. All right, let's make sure we just put this back in our modern context. So in our modern context here in the United States of America, where there's a church on almost every street corner, at least here in West Texas, a church on every corner, where there are Christian radio stations, Christian television networks, Christian bookstores, and where there are bazillions of churches online with their sermons being heard all over the world via the internet, where we can preach. Like here I am, I'm sitting here in this building and I can literally preach for 24 hours. If my voice would hold up, I could preach and preach and preach and preach and teach and teach and teach and teach and teach. No one's coming to my door to tell me I can't. I've got all this freedom. I can preach all over the place. And listen, we are also living in a time where the government of the United States of America handed to churches a large portion of $7.3 billion in PPP loans. Because of the pandemic, the church was handed millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars in order to be able to stay open. In other words, keeping people on the staff. That yes, they were still called to follow the rules, but in other words, the church wouldn't have to close down. They would be able to eat financially because they were like, hey, we're asking you to shut down. And because you're going to shut down, you're not going to be able to bring in money. Here, we're going to give you this money so that you can maintain the staff and that church can still remain intact. That doesn't sound like the early church. Where do you find in the early church the church being handed that much money to stay open? So I don't know how you can even compare us, even how anyone reasonable could say, we're finding ourselves in the same situation. What are you talking about? That sounds like paranoia. That sounds like craziness. Now, are we getting ready to face some difficult situations? Oh, absolutely. I think we are. The church always finds itself in difficult situations. But let me make it very clear. Most of the difficult situations we face have nothing to do with governmental forces outside of the church. Typically, the issues that plague the church most are the issues that arise from within the church, which is typically false teaching, abandonment of biblical Christianity. Look at the issues the church faced throughout the New Testament. Most of the scripture that's warning them of dealing with issues are not dealing with the issues outside of the church. The New Testament is filled with letters written to churches dealing with the problems that are arising from within the church. Within the church. When Paul is in prison, He doesn't write and go, man, we're being persecuted and they're coming at us and they hate God and they want to silence us. No, he's like, hey, church, you got to get your act together. Hey, church, you got to be aware of this false teaching. Hey, church, you need to put on the full armor of God. Hey, church, we don't fight against flesh and blood. We're fighting against principalities and powers and heavenly places and high places. We're fighting against spiritual forces against us. So I just find it, I already get a little worried that he's like, we're finding ourselves in a similar situation. What planet? Where are you at? Now, there are Christians around the world who are in very difficult circumstances. Christians in China, Christians in a predominantly Islamic country can find themselves in great danger. Yes, there are Christians who are, but here in the United States of America, okay, I freely drove to my church, freely turned on a microphone to go live on the internet, and freely can preach in the name of Jesus. I can preach against abortion. I can preach against homosexuality. I can call it a sin. And I've never found myself in any, look, the only time I've ever been silenced, this is absolutely the fact. The only time I've ever been silenced, I have never been silenced by a governmental force. I've never been silenced by atheist groups. I've never even been threatened or attacked by pro-homosexual LGBTQ groups. You know who I've been silenced by and threatened? It's always by fellow Christians. Thrown off Christian radio because I had the audacity to point out what churches were doing for the Super Bowl and what churches were doing for Easter, which had nothing to do with the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I get thrown off Christian radio, not by violating a rule because they never gave me a rule, but I didn't even get a warning. They just threw me off the air while I was on the air. So I've been silenced by Christian radio. I can remember all of the attacks when I was on sermon audio. Oh, phone calls at 2 a.m, 3 a.m, death threats, crazy things happened by supposed fellow Christians, never attacked by atheists, never attacked by the government, never. Now, I'm not saying that are there times where the government oversteps its boundaries and possibly attacks people's religious liberty? Yes, there is a time. There are times where that occurs. Yes. But guess what? At those times, the church still here in the United States of America has legal recourse to file their complaint in the court. There are many churches who felt that the rules were being applied to the churches during COVID that wasn't right. And guess what those churches did? Took it to court, and in many cases, those restrictions were overruled. That's not a place where you're being persecuted. That's legal representation in the court system. That's not a government trying to shut down the church and kill you for preaching in the name of Jesus. So let's at least have some connection with the reality in which we find ourselves. All right. So anything that even sounds like, we're finding ourselves in a similar situation to the early church, that makes me very concerned that you would even try to describe it that way. But let's see what maybe he doesn't mean it the way that just came across. Let's back it up just a little bit. Right? We'll back it up just a little bit so that we can hear that statement again. Here we go.
Is bringing us back to where the church was when these words were first written. That is, we are moving away from the commonly called Judeo-Christian heritage of the West. We are moving back toward the paganism of early Rome. What do I mean by that? Well, you need to understand that the Roman system under which these words were written, the Roman system was one of a massive empire that at that time controlled the entire Mediterranean basin. And very often, when the New Testament writers use the term the whole world, that's what they're talking about. They're not talking about the globe. They're talking about the whole world, that is, the entire Roman Empire. Out at the fringes, you had the barbarians, the people who did not speak the languages of the empire, the high language of the empire, Latin, or the common language, Koine Greek. They spoke other languages, and so they were called the barbarians, and their references made to them a number of times in the New Testament.
Okay, now, So he seems to be implying that so the way he's describing it is that we're moving away from a Judeo-Christian worldview. So that's the way we're returning to that time. Okay. I can agree with that to some level. I just want to make it very clear, though. Still, we must understand that even if we're moving back to that, we still have to understand the context in which we currently live. The government giving money, access to legal recourse to fight for our rights. We still have so much. So yes, the culture is moving away, no question about it. And will that impact the government? No question about it. So I can kind of agree with where he's going. I just get very nervous when we start talking about Romans 13 and we start trying to say, we find ourselves in a similar situation. Okay, he clarified it. Okay, good. I still get nervous because I just find that sometimes Christians always act like, they're after us and they're persecuting us and they're after us. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Who's after you? Like, what are you, who's trying to silence you? What is going on? And again, when with the pandemic, churches are like, they hate Christ and they're trying to silence the church. Look around you. They stopped people from showing up to football games, basketball games, concerts, wrestling events. It's not just you. Okay, synagogues, mosque. They've stopped other religions as well. Okay, so you at least have to. We've got to just make sure when we deal with these subjects, we just got to make sure we put in the broader context. All right, but he's going into the context of the times. All right, I'm still waiting for him to get to Romans 13 because he's got to tell us what it means. He's going to tell us what it means because I guess this is difficult to understand. Well, we'll see. All right, here we go.
But this Roman Empire had conquered literally hundreds of different nations, nation-states, small kingdoms, fiefdoms, languages, and religions. And so to hold all of this together, the genius of the Roman system was that it did not attempt to enforce a singular religious concept upon everyone, a singular set of gods upon everyone. There was an element of religious freedom, but it had to be a religious freedom that would allow Rome to maintain the unity that existed within her own borders. So how do you do that? Well, you allow anyone to worship whatever God they want to worship, as long as your God does not try to wipe out everybody else's gods. And so as long as there was a sense of plurality, and as long as your God allowed you to offer the pinch of incense upon the altar to Caesar. So you had to acknowledge the supreme authority in governmental issues of Caesar, and then you could do what you wanted in regards to the worship of your God, as long as it did not involve killing your neighbors and starting wars and doing things like that. You could build your altars, you could have your sacrifices, you could have your temples, and that was just fine. And let's be honest, for hundreds of years that worked. For literally hundreds of years. Far longer than our nation has existed. Rome brought relative peace. Now, it was not perfect. There were rebellions here and rebellions there, and there were people that would, get followers to follow after them. But in general, especially in some areas, there was peace and prosperity for century after century after century. And a lot of people could probably come up with the argument, man, if you stop wars and you stop famines, oh, sure, there would still be a famine. Remember, there was a famine in Jerusalem, and it wasn't perfect. But in general, Rome saved more lives than they took over that time period. Someone could make the argument, that's showing love for your brother. maybe that offering of the pinch of incense isn't all that bad of a thing if you're saving lives, right? Well, now, I don't want to give you a bad impression, or better to put, a wrong impression. There was tremendous degradation in the morality of Rome, even at its height. The Romans would expose children they did not want to keep. So they had their own form of abortion. And so if your wife had a son or a daughter and your plans were otherwise and that didn't fit your plans, they would simply take that infant. I can't imagine how the mothers dealt with this. But they would simply take that infant and leave it out in the garbage pile overnight. And the roving bands of dogs in Rome would take care of all the rest. Christians became known as those weird people who would go out at night to the garbage piles and would rescue babies and raise them as their own, even though they were poor. And it only made it more difficult for them to have enough food. And so there was much in the way of degradation, and you have the Neros and the Caligulas that come about at those times. But in general, Rome provided peace. As long as you would say Caesar is Lord and acknowledge him as one of your authorities. You just could not have this monotheistic, crazy idea that there is only one God and one way of properly worshiping him, which is why you had the period of persecution for centuries of the Christian people. And so, did Paul just simply miss it here? Did he just simply write something? There would be those. You could probably go to a quote-unquote Christian bookstore, if any of them exist anymore, and buy a commentary where someone would probably take the view, well, you know, Paul wrote this at such a point in time before persecution really became bad. I'm certain that in later times he would want to amend what he said to the Romans, because there are many people that write books, write commentaries, that don't really believe that what we have here is theopneustos, it is God-breathed. So you'd probably find that in various commentaries that, well, Paul probably would like to have changed this, but it was a little bit late once you send the letter and people start copying it. It's sort of hard to take it back. Sort of like anytime you send anything on Facebook. Once it's sent, it's sent. There ain't no unsending anything, right? Is that what's going on here? I would suggest to you, of course, that that is not the way to understand this at all. Let every person be in subjection to the governing authorities. Now, I mentioned when we started reading this that there is an interesting interpretation that I'll present it to you. I think we end up coming to the same conclusion one way or the other. But there is an interesting interpretation of the Greek here that would indicate that the descriptive term, you have ruling authorities. It's literally those that are above, and you can demonstrate outside the New Testament the utilization of this particular term to refer to those which excel in moral authority and goodness. And if that's the way to understand this, and there are some commentators who have made this argument and would say this is how to understand it, what he's saying is let every person be in subjection to those authorities that have demonstrated their moral consistency and supremacy.
Okay, I think I see where this argument is going. I think the argument's going to go in this direction. Hey, as long as the government shows their moral excellence, then you submit. The minute they demonstrate a lack of moral excellence, all bets are off. You don't have to follow them. You don't have to listen to them. Now, we got to think about this. Okay, so how does this work? So if the government is immoral, now are you saying immoral in character or immoral in policy? That's the first thing we have to establish. If they're immoral in character, well then, okay, then how far can I take my disobedience? How far can I take it? They're immoral in their character. I'm not paying my taxes. They're immoral in their character. I'm not following the speed limit. I'm not following seatbelt laws. Like how far? Or are you only saying that if they're immoral in character, that I don't have to follow them the minute they institute an immoral policy. Is that when I don't have to follow the policy? But if all policies are coming from those of an immoral character, then aren't all policies then tainted by their immoral character? Like, how far do you take this argument? He seems to be going in this direction. But let me just make sure. The government that was in charge at the time Paul wrote these words to the Romans was immoral. It was 10 years of adulteries, of murders, of injustice carried out by the leaders of the Roman Empire. So they were immoral. So is Paul saying, hey guys, is this what Paul's saying? Hey guys, the only government you need to listen to are those who are moral. The government you are currently under is not moral, so you don't have to obey them. Is he literally telling them not? So are we reading Romans 13 in this way? Hey guys, don't obey the government that's currently over you. It's immoral. Is that how we read this? Now, so was Trump immoral? Well, he may have been immoral, but we liked his policy, so that means we obey him. Right? So is it immoral character or immoral policy? That we have to establish that. Immoral character or immoral policy? Because if you're translating this, hey, be subject unto the higher powers, be subject to the powers that demonstrate high moral, a moral quality, moral, character, then you're dealing with the character of the individual. You're dealing with the morality of the individual. Well, at that point, I would say, which government should we have ever followed? Because every governmental politician is a sinner by nature. They're sinners. I don't know. This is the argument he's going to. It just seems like basically we're getting ready to turn Romans 13 on its head. That's where I feel it's going. That's where I'm just thinking with you. I'm trying to work through this with you, right? Remember, that's the way I love to do reviews. It's like we're listening to this together, and I'm just stopping, throwing out my 2 cents. I'm getting my way of thinking. Now, he may go in a different direction. That's okay. But right now, that's my concern. Is he's almost saying that this is almost the way I feel it's going to go. Romans 13, what he was actually telling them is you only obey those governments that are moral. If they're not moral, you don't obey. Wow, that. Well, you could go to some, I wonder if that applies. Hey, only obey your parents if your parents are moral. Wives, only submit yourselves to your husbands if they're moral. Right? Hey, slaves, only obey your masters if they're moral. But wait, didn't Peter say, hey, even if they're not good, even if they're bad, still submit? So remember in 1 Peter? Let's go back. Is it 1 Peter 2? Give me 1 second. I'll look for it really quick because if that's 1 Peter chapter 2. Verse 18, 1 Peter 2:18, servants, be subject to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the froward. For this is thankworthy if a man for conscience towards God endure grief, suffering wrong fully. So what Peter seems to be saying, hey, no, you submit and suffer. When that's when it's thankworthy, that's when it's praiseworthy, is when you're suffering wrong at the hands of someone who's evil and you demonstrate submission to it. That's when it's godly. Well, does that not apply to? Did Peter get it wrong? Does Peter add extra context to the kind of submission that's being spoken of here? Because Peter is speaking about the servants submitting to their masters in light of what he just said about government. So will you only submit to government when it's moral and good? Well, what are we submitting to? It's a morally good government that gives morally good policies. So submit to it. What am I submitting to? I'm submitting to a government that does what I already want. Is that? I don't know if that's where this is going, but I'm getting a little concerned. But let's continue.
Well, that's an interesting way of seeing it because it's very plain. Paul's going to say it's a minister to God for your good. If you do what is evil, be afraid. These rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior. All these things come later and are consistent with this understanding. So I'm not saying that I think it's impossible that we understand it this way, that it may well be the correct way of understanding it. I'm just saying I don't know that we have to insist upon it, because the rest of the text tells us very clearly that the governing authorities that are being referred to here function in a particular fashion. They're being described to us both here, and you'll notice in 1 Peter chapter 2, they do certain things. And it's the things that they are doing that is most important. It's interesting that in the periods of the history of the church, when state and church have gotten a little bit too cozy, a little bit too connected to one another, this text and 1 Peter 2 have been understood as preaching an absolute subjugation to kings in particular. For example, as I was doing some reading on this, and by the way, the stuff in the bulletin, a couple of those quotes came from, you all call him Uncle Gary DeMar, but I can't do that because we're pretty much in the same age group. So, but Brother Gary DeMar, and I can tell you some fun stories of things that Gary and I have gotten to do in the past on ships bobbing around the ocean. That was a lot of fun with R.C. Sproul, but we won't go into that right now. That's more for man camp, right? Yeah, there you go. The girls are going, well, we'd like to hear that too. Well, we'll find some way of doing that. But those citations, and it was Gary that pointed out, and I verified it, that it's very interesting that King James detested the Geneva Bible of 1559. He detested it. Now, it happens to be a great translation, despite what my daughter thinks about the Christmas story. And only my family gets that particular story. There's another one that we can tell sometime. Maybe she'll tell that on Theology sometime. But it's an excellent translation.
Okay, I'm trying to be patient. I'm trying to be patient here. I know as preachers, we all do it. You start preaching, and then all of a sudden a thought comes to your mind, and then you throw in this, and then you want to tell this story, and you want to tell this story. We all do it. So I'm not going to be highly critical. I've got my own communication, my own flaws in communication, my ability to read words correctly. I've got my own flaws in communication. So I don't want to pick on anyone here. I just wish, okay, get to what is Romans 13 telling me? Tell me what, because he's going a long way, saying a lot of words. I just want to know, when we get down to it, are you telling me I don't have to follow Romans 13 if the government is bad? If the government is bad, I don't have to follow Romans 13. How far do I take this? It just feels like every minute he takes these detours, is another minute that he's losing to really articulate exactly what we can and cannot do. Because this is a major issue. Look, for example, Romans 13, all right? Hey, churches, if you're going to have a service, wear a mask. Nope, you're an immoral government. I am not following that rule. Well, wait a minute. Is that forbidding you to preach in the name of Jesus? No. Is that stopping you from meeting? No. So why would I violate that rule? Because in Romans 13, remember Romans 13, after it goes through all of this, what does it say? He goes, Romans 13, verse 9. For this, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. If there be any other commandment, it is briefly comprehended in saying, namely, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Love worketh no ill to his neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. So, all right, so if the government is immoral, then I don't have to obey. Doesn't love come in and love then become the key factor? Okay, the government is telling us this, but the government is immoral. We don't have to follow that. But we have another law. We have to love. So what can I do to demonstrate love to my neighbor? Jesus would say, love even your enemy. How can I demonstrate love to other people in the middle of a global pandemic? So why would you not social distance and not wear a mask? Well, no. We don't have to follow that either. So I'm getting to the point that I don't understand, like, does Romans 13 mean anything? What meaning, where I think we're going is Romans 13 only applies when you like the government and you like the rules. But First Peter is telling servants to submit to their masters, even when their masters are not nice, even when their masters make them suffer in an unjust way. So why wouldn't that apply to the very government when the government makes us suffer in an unjust way? Like, these are the questions I have. Maybe he's going to answer it. Great. But all right, let's see where he's going to go. I'm trying to be patient. I'm trying to be patient here. All right, here we go. And I'm not being super critical, because if you've listened to me, there's times you get frustrated with me and you tell me, I wish you would just make your point. I agree with you. I'm guilty of it. All pastors are guilty of it. If you communicate live in front of people, whether preaching or in a podcast that's live on the air where there's no editing, you're going to make lots of mistakes in your communication. Every podcast episode I listen to, I go back and go, man, I messed up there. Man, I messed up there. And it bothers me. Sunday was a day that I believe every episode I did was complete, utter garbage. Okay, but so I don't want to be critical of that. I'm just saying for this discussion, I want to really get to the meat of it, but we'll let him get there.
But it had all sorts of footnotes in it. It had commentary. Yes, it was the early Ryrie Study Bible, the Schofield Study Bible, whatever else it might be. I'm telling you what I was raised with right there. And in those notes, there were all sorts of notes that talked about tyrants. And how kings can become tyrants if they do not remain subject to the law of God and see themselves as ministers of God's justice. And so, for example, in commenting in the book of Daniel, there was the statement about the king and about how God basically defied the king's authority in the life of Daniel. And these were things that King James did not like at all. That was one of the reasons for the creation of the King James translation, is the Geneva Bible just didn't fit his purposes. And you know what's interesting? I didn't know this. If you look up the word tyrant, you all have your phones there. Don't do it right now. Where's Elliot? Okay. There he is. Okay, he's hiding over in the corner. Okay, good. I scared him to death a few weeks ago, and he still got the shakes. If you look it up sometime in your King James Bible on your phone, put in the word tyrant, and it'll just stare at you, because it doesn't appear in the King James Bible. King James wouldn't allow it. There are a number of terms that the king sort of suggested might not appear in his translation. Very interesting. The problem is there are tyrants. There were tyrants in the Roman Empire. And does Romans chapter 13 tell us that we are simply to be in subjection to tyrants? That we are to do whatever they say? And there is no authority except from God. That means all tyrants come from God. Well, we understand God in God's sovereignty, that God raises up tyrants. But what are tyrants to a people? An act of judgment. They're an act of judgment upon a people. And so, as we look at the description, what I want you to do is, All
right, let's stop right here. Okay, now first, the definition of the word tyrants: a cruel and oppressive ruler. A cruel and oppressive ruler. Now, if we go with the idea that Romans 13 is not telling people to submit to a tyrant, to a cruel and oppressive ruler, number one, was Nero a cruel and oppressive ruler? Yes or no? Was the Roman Empire a cruel and oppressive ruler? If it was, is Paul saying, hey guys, I'm not telling you to submit to the government that's currently over you, but isn't Paul telling them that all government is appointed by him? So wouldn't he then, now does he not go on to say what government should do? Government should B, punishing evil. That's the purpose of government. But does government always fulfill that purpose? Clearly not. In many cases, it violates that and goes against it. So then you're free not to submit. So is he literally saying the government in front of you is not doing the right thing? Don't submit. But does he not tell them that that's the government God appointed over them? Now, even if we step away from Rome and we look at 2021 America, are we currently facing a cruel and oppressive ruler and the Biden? Well, he did, remember earlier in this sermon, if you didn't listen to the first broadcast, he won't refer to that as the Biden administration. He's referring to it as the Biden regime. Now, if you go with what he said earlier, now what he's saying now, it seems where he is going is that Biden is a tyrant, is a tyranny, is an oppressive, cruel ruler, so we don't have to follow him. And I guess Trump was not. He was the epitome of morality and godliness. I don't know where this is going, but I'm getting very, very concerned. Let's just remind ourselves that this person that's preaching lives under such a cruel and oppressive government that he's allowed to preach and post on the internet a discussion about not obeying a cruel and oppressive government. Well, it usually doesn't work that way. Usually if you're under a tyrant and you preach against submitting to the tyrant is going to silence you, not allow you to post it all over the internet. Okay? And allow, I don't know how big that church is. I saw a photograph, I think, from this service, and they're packed in there, no mask, no social distancing. Of course not. Because if you're going to try to get out of Romans 13, and obviously you're not going to be following rules about social distancing, because that's the rules of a tyrant. That's an oppressive, evil government that was trying to kill you. Okay, right? So, but I guess loving your neighbor doesn't. I'm so just done with trying to figure out Christians. What it comes down to is we're going to make the Bible say whatever we want it to say. That's what we're going to do. And at some point we just got to admit that that's what we do. We're going to make God say what we want him to say. So, but we'll see where we go here. So it's almost, is Paul saying that we should submit to tyrants? If not, then all we have to do is identify the government that we don't like as a tyrant or as a tyranny. And then guess what? You're free not to obey. How far can you take that disobedience? Now, I still need that clarification. How far can I take the disobedience? Because he's clearly establishing there are times we don't have to obey. What are those clear, identifiable times? This church that you're listening to is not following mask mandates or social distancing mandates. And I don't know if in Arizona, that's where this church is located, I don't know if they have a restriction on gatherings. If they do, they're not following that rule. So they're not following any of those rules, because I guess all of those rules fall under dictates from a tyrannical government that you don't have to obey. Do you see how just absurd this even becomes? But hey, if you're a slave and your master is mean to you and evil to you, you still submit. So I guess for slaves, they had to admit to the evil slave owner. But hey, if you're a Christian, you don't have to obey a tyrannical government. But if you're a slave, I'm sorry, you just submit. Like, what? Like if I'm an atheist or an agnostic listening to this, I'm like, okay, I'm a little confused here. He read 1 Peter that seemed to say slaves have to submit to a bad leader, but he's now seeming like he's making an argument that you don't always have to obey a tyrannical government. So it's better to be under a tyrannical government. You definitely don't want to be a slave, though, because if you're a slave, you're out of luck. Yeah. All right. I need a lot of clarification here. Let's see if he's going to clarify any.
Mind, I want you to be thinking about 1 Peter 2 here in Romans chapter 13. What was the foundational concept in the mind of both apostles? And then remember, just a few weeks ago, in our study behind this pulpit, we looked at Acts chapter 13, remember? And what happened in Acts chapter 13? God delivered Peter from prison, remember? And he did so miraculously. And when Peter was let out of that prison, remember he went to the gathered church. Remember the humorous incident? It's probably why we don't have a lot of girls named Rhoda in the church. Because Rhoda hears Peter's voice, and instead of letting the poor guy in who just got let out of prison, she leaves him standing out there and goes running inside. And his spirit, his angel's outside. And finally they let poor Peter in. And what does he do? Does Peter go, I need to be in subjection to the governing authorities? And so even though an angel has released me, I need to go back and allow myself to be destroyed by Herod. What did he do? He left a message for James and got out of Dodge. Or in this case, Jerusalem.
Okay, let's take that story and let's apply it. If the government puts you in prison and God, through supernatural means, miraculously gets you out of prison, then by all means, you just go ahead and don't go back and you don't submit. I'm all for that. If God miraculously, supernaturally delivers you from bondage, then by all means, don't submit. I got no problem with that. Okay, right. If that's going to somehow come into play here, but all right.
And then what happened? The poor soldiers who were guarding him, who are kept asleep or kept from seeing what happens or whatever supernaturally, what happened to them? They died. They were executed. Because if you're a Roman soldier and you're guarding someone, what are you supposed to do? Say an angel took him? That's not going to fly real well, even if it was true, which it happened to be. Not only were they executed, and you might stop and remember we pointed out, justly, they were involved in the wrongful, unjust persecution of one of God's followers. And what did the meek and mild Lord Jesus say during his earthly ministry? It would be better if a millstone were tied around your neck and you were drowned in the depth of the sea than you were to offend one of these little ones.
Now let me stop right here. Let's also just bring into context. So you got this story where someone is released out of prison and he runs and the guards are killed. And so, okay, so this seems to show a lack of submission. Let's remind ourselves of Acts chapter 16. All right. Acts chapter 16, verse 20. And brought them to the magistrates, saying, these men, being Jews, do exceedingly trouble our city. All right, so we have some Christians who are now in trouble because they're supposedly bringing trouble to the city. They teach customs which are not lawful for us to receive, neither to observe, being Romans. And the multitude rose up against them, and the magistrates rent off their clothes and commanded to beat them. And when they had laid many stripes upon them, they cast them into prison, charging the jailer to keep them safely. When having received such a charge, thrust them into the inner prison and made their feet fast in the stocks. And at midnight, Paul and Silas prayed and sang praises unto God, and the prisoners heard them. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, so that the foundations of the prison were shaken, and immediately all the doors were opened, and everyone's bands were loosed. And the keeper of the prison, awaking out of his sleep and seeing the prison doors open, he drew out his sword and would have killed himself, supposing that the prisoners had been fled. So he thinks, okay, obviously the prisoners all ran off. Now remember, hey, they were supernaturally released. You take off. You don't have to submit. Well, what happens here? But Paul cried with a loud voice, saying, do thyself no harm, for we are all here. Well, wait, why didn't they all run away? Why didn't they all run away? I mean, if we're going to bring in biblical stories and try to make a point from it, what's the point here? Why didn't they run? Right? Then he called for a light, sprang in, came trembling, and fell down before Paul and Silas. And he brought them and brought them out and said, sirs, what must I do to be saved? And they said, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, thou shalt be saved, and thy house. And they spake unto him the word of the Lord, and to all that were in his house. And he took them to the same hour of the night, washed their stripes, and was baptized, and straightway. And when he had brought them into his house, he set meat before them, Okay, and when it was day, the magistrates sent the sergeants saying, let those men, and when it was day, the magistrates sent the sergeants saying, let those men go. And the keeper of the prison told the saying of Paul, the magistrates have sent to let you go. Now therefore depart and go in peace. They did not leave until they were sent away. Why didn't they stay? Why didn't they leave immediately? Why did they wait to be given a release? How do you understand that story? If you're gonna go to the other story, what about this story? What about, like, we have to put this all together. We have to put all of these stories together. All right. Give me 1 second. I'm looking at something here. Yeah, I'm looking. Yeah, we may have to look at the other story. I'm just saying you have to consider that story there. You can't just ignore that story, right? You can't just ignore that story because there's a story where there's an earthquake. The people could have ran off. They didn't run off. They stay. They preach to this person. They don't leave until finally they're told that they're free to go. Why did they stick around? Why? I mean, you can't just ignore that story as well. You can't. All right, we'll go back and listen to what they have to say. I just hate when we pick one story that seems to go with our narrative, but ignore another story that goes against our narrative. That's not the way you do Bible teaching. You're going to bring up, look, there's these two situations that appear they are handled in a different way. Why? Well, again, you're in the book of Acts. Let's get a couple of things. God is communicating directly in many cases with these people. Now we have his word. So if God communicates with them directly and tells them to do something, you can't compare that to me now because all I can do now is open up Romans 13. Now, if you're going to say, well, now Romans 13 doesn't mean what it says because we have this one story in Acts, there's so many issues here, but let's continue. I'm running out of time.
We need to go back to Revelation chapter 1 and see the picture of the risen Jesus and be reminded he will rule the nations with a rod of iron. The picture of Jesus with the little lamb, there's an element of truth to that, but it's only a partial truth. And the world is perfectly fine with the Jesus in the manger as long as he's not the Jesus on the throne. And so what happens at the end of Acts chapter 13? Herod...
All right, we got to stop right here. Because I went back to the Acts 12 story just because I want to know the difference. So an earthquake happens. And Paul and them, they don't leave. They stay. And they stay until they are released. All right, that seems to be showing complete subjection to the government. He brought up the story of Peter. But let's remind ourselves exactly how Peter was released from his captivity, all right? Peter was kept in, this is Acts chapter 12, verse 5. Peter was kept in prison, but prayer was made without ceasing of the church unto God for him. And Herod would have brought him forth the same night. Peter was sleeping between two soldiers, bound with two chains, and the keepers before the door kept the prison. And behold, the angel of the Lord came upon him, and light shined in the prison, and smote Peter on the side, and raised him up, saying, Arise up quickly. And his chains fell off from his hands. And the angel said unto him, Gird thyself, bind on thy sandals. And so he did. And he saith unto him, Cast thy garments about thee, and follow me. He literally, the angel of the Lord, shows up and says, Go. When God literally shows up to you and says, go, you don't have to stay here, you don't have to obey, then by all means don't. But guess what? That's not how it works. Now God reveals himself through his written word, unless now you're going to claim that God just tells you not to obey. God told me not to obey. God told me not to follow the rules. No, you have to follow scripture. That's how God communicates. Right? That's how God communicates. Sola scriptura. Scripture is the final authority. So it's just interesting that he goes to the Acts 12 story, but he ignored the other story. What was the difference between the stories? An earthquake happens, but no angel shows up telling Paul to leave. So where does Paul stay? He stays right there. He submits himself until the magistrates say, you can leave. The other story, the angel of the Lord says, get up and go. Yeah, now you're getting up and going because God specifically told you what to do. The stories are like, how do you not bring in both of those stories? So when can you disobey? When God specifically tells you to disobey. Where in Scripture are we told to specifically disobey rules about health recommendations during a global pandemic? No, we are giving Scripture love people. Love is the fulfillment of the law. Love your neighbor. Now, when are we told to disobey? When we can disobey Scripture? We have an example of when you are forbidden to preach in the name of Jesus. Then, I don't know how this is complicated, but I guess somehow we still don't understand Romans 13. But thank goodness we've got these preachers who can come along and help clarify Romans 13, because Romans 13 is just so complicated. It is so difficult to understand. It is so confusing. And this sermon has been going on for 35 minutes. And I mean, he's really helped me see what Romans 13 really means. I know we're still waiting, but let's go. We're going to continue. Look, I have to finish this one up in this part. I don't want to do 3 parts here. So I'm going to finish this one up. I apologize that it's already been this long, but we have to finish this. So here we go.
Who thinks he's going to get political points by killing Peter. He's frustrated in that. And then he goes up to Tyre and Sidon. He allows himself basically to be worshipped, and God cuts him down in the most public of ways and kills him. But Herod represented the state. Yeah. And look what God did. So let's look at these words. Therefore, he who resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. Okay? So we can't have anarchy. There is to be submission to governing authorities. What governing authorities? For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Stop right there. Stop right there.
Yeah, let's stop right there. Let's stop right there. First, the government that was in place at the time of the writing of the book of Romans, was it a government that, as he says, are not a terror to good works, but to evil? I will say Nero and the Roman Empire at this time had spent 10 years of adulteries, murders, and injustice, and they hadn't been. All right, so that's number one. Number two, okay, let's go with this. Rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. All right. So they're not a terror to good works. They're a terror to evil. All right. So if they impose a rule that says we're in the middle of a global pandemic where over 1 million people have died, over 400,000 people have died in the United States of America, and we think you should wear masks, social distance, and limit the number of people gathered, is that a terror to good works? Is that imposing evil upon you? Is that some kind of crazy persecution like feeding you to the lions? Is this some tyrant, some oppressive government? Now, again, the reason I keep bringing that up is he's preaching in a church that's packed with people and no one wearing a mask and social distancing. So they are not following the rules. And again, I'd have to look at the current rules in the state of Arizona. I don't know what the restrictions are early, but forget even the restrictions. What are the suggestions? So I guess the law about loving your neighbor doesn't apply. But if you say you got to love your neighbor, like, oh, I'm so tired of hearing you say love your neighbor. I don't have to follow rules to love my neighbor. Well, you know what? When I'm in a hurry, and I have to go through a school zone because I'm in a hurry and I got to get to work because I don't want to be late to work because, I want to be a good employee. But you know what? There's that stupid school zone that says 25 miles an hour. Well, you know what? Why should I slow down? Because it was probably a tyrannical government who put this rule in front of me. So I'll just run through the school zone doing 75. And if I hit a kid, I hit a kid. It's not my problem because God is sovereign. And God obviously wanted the kid to die in the first place. And you know what? How many kids died getting hit in a school zone? There's not very many. Statistics say there's a far greater chance they're going to die of heart disease or from something else, because this whole thing about kids getting hit in the street because you're running through a school zone at 75 miles an hour, I think it's just overblown hyperbole. It's ridiculous. Not that many kids die. So I'm going to do 75 because why should I follow the government anyway? Because it's tyrannical and it's evil. Hey, because Romans 13, hey, there's a certain kind of government I can obey. All I got to do is say the wrong kind of government is in place, and that I don't have to obey. Yeah, at some point, it just demonstrates. Look, at some point, this is where I get. At some point, if Romans 13 doesn't mean what it seems to mean, then why do we follow anything in the Bible? Why do we follow any rules? Forget adultery, fornication, lust. Just do whatever we want to do, and we can always find a way to get around it. Always. We find a way to get around it when we want a way around it, but when it's someone else, you're like, no, that scripture applies to you, and you're a sinner, and now we're gonna come after you. But hey, when it's us, no, we don't have to follow rules. Come on, Romans 13, it's the wrong kind of government. We don't have to submit. And I guess, and again, if we interpret it that way, then what Paul is telling the people at the church in Rome is you don't have to submit to Nero. It would be wonderful to go back then and see if they understood it that way.
Don't miss that. Rulers are not a cause of fear. What rulers are we talking about? These are the ones that we're to be in subjection to. We are to be in subjection to rulers who are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Rulers who would encourage good. Rulers who punish evil. That's what this is about. What does it say? Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. What must the ruling authority understand and know? They must know what's good. If they're going to punish evil, what must they know? That which is evil. Who gets to determine that? There's the issue. There's the issue. These words are written for the church in all ages. And remember what Peter does in 1 Peter chapter 2? After he likewise says, be in subjection to these people, what's the next thing he quotes? The second half of the Ten Commandments. God's law. When it says it is a minister of God to you for good, then it must understand what good is. And so when you have a state, when you have a government that is given over by God in judgment, and that state begins to punish the good and promote the evil, is this what we have in Paul's mind in Romans chapter 13? Let me give you a very, very current example. A very current example. This morning, a friend of mine in Alpha and Omega's private, highly encrypted chat channel. Boy, we're all learning about encryption, aren't we? Yeah, we are. Posted an image. It's an image I've seen before. Maybe you've seen it. It is of an individual who is 6'2" and weighs 220 pounds. This individual looks a little bit like the bear. But this individual is playing women's rugby in Australia. And so here is this picture of this individual, and there's a number of pictures. You can go online. There's a number of pictures. One of them is during play, and you see these women simply bouncing off this guy. They look like little children. He is a head taller than the biggest woman out there. And he's 75 pounds heavier than the biggest woman out there. And they're just, it's like a truck just driving through a bunch of little Volkswagens. It's just absurd. There's another shot that I saw. It's between plays.
I want you to understand something here, okay? I want you to understand something here because at this point, I'm starting to get frustrated. And here's the reason why. If your job is to explain Romans 13 and tell me how it applies and when it doesn't apply, it just seems he's doing a lot of talking around Romans 13, but we're not really digging in and taking Romans 13 apart. Because if you really start digging in and taking Romans 13 apart, I mean, his best argument is Romans 13, here's how we interpret it. Unless government is doing the right thing, you don't have to submit. All right. Well, then, is there any limit in that lack of submission? Do I have to pay taxes? What is he saying? Now, he still hasn't dealt with the fact that the government that's in place at the time would not have met the criteria of doing good. They were doing evil. So how do we get around it there? And number two, that's the first main thing. How do we get around it right there? And number two, if you're going to apply it to our modern times, again, let's apply it to the pandemic because this is why everyone's talking about it. How is making rules trying to keep people protected and not getting sick? How is that evil? Why are you not following those rules? Why are they not following those rules? So what example does he go to? He's going to go to an example of about a transgender person playing rugby against women. Here's basically a man, but he identifies as a woman. He's playing against women. Now, do I think those rules are ridiculous? Yes. Do I think they're foolish? Yes. Do I think it's going to have major implications on society and how we go forward? Yes. How do we deal with that as a church? We need to talk about that. But the goal of this sermon is supposed to be Romans 13. So what is he going to say? Hey, if a transgender person is playing in your sport, you don't have to follow the rules. What do you mean you don't follow the rules? What rules? You don't have to play. You don't have to participate. Okay. Why don't we give an example where push comes to shove? The government saying, put on a mask. There you go. Now let's apply that to Romans 13. Is that mask rule doing any harm? No. What's the goal of the mask rule? To try to preserve life and protect life. Therefore, as a Christian, follow that rule. Why don't we apply it there? But no, obviously we're not going to apply. We're going to go to some transgender thing. Okay, what? Is that because what he's going to go with the transgender thing is to see, the government is evil. Therefore, we don't have to follow the government. So I guess, is this the logical way we follow this? See their views about LGBTQ, homosexual, and transgenderism? Because those rules are crazy. That shows the government is evil. Therefore, we don't have to follow any other rule. Is that how far we take it? Well, then why do I follow that rule? Because used to when I would go to work, and the reason I used the school zone is because when I drove to work, once I took it was the street that would take me straight from the highway right down to the front gate of the Air Force Base where I worked at. I had to go through a school zone, and there'd be some mornings I'd be like, man, I want to hurry up and get to work. But there's that school zone saying 25 miles an hour, 25 miles an hour. Well, why do I got to follow it? Because the government, that same government probably believes in homosexuality and same-sex marriage. Why do I follow those rules? And if I do with the logic that many Christians do with the pandemic, I mean, what are the statistics of kids getting hit in the street? There are not that many kids get hit in the street each year. There really aren't. So I shouldn't have to follow the rules. I mean, because your chances of dying from this pandemic are what, 1%, right? 1%. So I don't need to follow the rules for 1%. Well, what are the chances of a kid getting hit by a car in the school zone? Not that great, right? Well, then I'll do 75. And if a kid gets hit, remember what MacArthur said later on after he changed his tone. Hey, if someone dies, it's not my fault. God is sovereign. Okay, well, then if a kid dies, it's not my fault. God is sovereign. I mean, that's what we really need to talk about, but we're going to talk about transgender. All right, here we go. Let's continue. We got to finish this up.
And this big dude is walking past, and they just happen to catch this one poor girl who's looking at him just going, because it's like, how is this happening? Why is this? How is this fair? We can't stop this person. But what are we told today? Let me tell you something. When I graduated from high school, there wouldn't have been anyone who would have honored this guy for beating up on a bunch of girls. That would have been the type of thing that would have appeared on Saturday Night Live as a joke. But there would have been shame involved with any man who thought that he was being something big by playing on the girls' team and beating them all up. If you're wondering, I graduated in 1981. And evidently, there's at least one other person in the audience that graduated in 1981. It's hard for me to believe that was a long time ago now. I remember it like yesterday. But now, quite literally, brothers and sisters, we are facing a situation where the newly sworn in, yes, he placed his hand on a Bible, I'm really surprised it didn't explode, President of the United States has said, he said in 2019, the human rights issue of our day is transgender rights.
So if Biden puts his hands on the Bible, you're surprised it didn't explode. But when Trump stood in front of a church holding up the Bible for a photo op, were you surprised that it didn't explode then? Or when Trump was sworn in, were you not surprised that it didn't explode? So the Bible should only explode when a Democrat touch it, but when a Republican, now maybe he said those things about Trump. Maybe he did. I don't know. Let's just come on. Like politicians have been putting their hands on Bibles for a very long time, and no matter how corrupt they are, no matter how immoral they are, that's something we do here in the United States of America. All right? And that whole photo op that President Trump did in front of the church, I did an entire live broadcast about that. Don't even get me started, because I want to make that very clear. The Bible is not your political prop. I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. So transgenderism is the issue. Or transgenderism is the issue. See, he's removing this as far as those things that are very close to how deal with something that's right now the church is dealing with. But I guess if transgenderism is the issue, then that means you don't have to follow mask rules and social distancing rules. I guess. But 30 minutes. We've got to make it through this. We got to make it through this. All right, here we go.
The human rights issue globally is making sure that 6'2", 220-pound man can bowl over every girl in his way on the way to the end zone. That is the most important human rights issue in the world. That is depravity on a level I will never understand. I will never understand. And yet, he didn't hide this. There is a law already passed by the House, which was kept from becoming law by the Senate, which is now in the control of the same party, by whatever means that took place. There is.
All right, I see the implication? By whatever means, because the election was stolen. The election was stolen. Is that the implication? See, now at this point, this is no longer about hermeneutics, interpreting Romans 13. Now you're throwing in your little political theory. Oh, I don't know, by whatever means necessary. Maybe the means necessary, maybe this is the means that's necessary. More people got sick of President Trump and wanted something different than those who still support President Trump. Do you ever think that that's a possibility? You've already acknowledged that our country is moving away from a Judeo-Christian worldview. So maybe many people who moved away from a Judeo-Christian worldview don't like policies that I guess you think are in line with the Judeo-Christian worldview and decided to vote for someone different. Is it possible that could have occurred? Is it possible? No. By some means, implication, possibly stolen. Are you going to preach Romans 13? Are you just going to demonstrate that you, I guess, are a Republican who believes Trump and the Republicans should still be in charge of our government? Is that what the purpose of this message is? Deal with Romans 13. That's what we are listening to this for. Deal with Romans 13. So far, what I basically am getting is if the government is immoral, you don't have to follow it. You don't have to submit to it. You don't have to obey it. Well, I need some clarification. How far can I take this? And again, why did it not apply? So what? So I guess the way I need to read Romans 13 is, hey, you guys in Rome, look at your government. It's messed up. Don't submit to it. But wait, he tells them that all government is appointed by God. So that would have to mean he's talking about the government that's currently over them, right? Like, how can we make Romans 13 this complicated? If we cannot figure out Romans 13, how in the world can we figure out the Trinity? How can we figure out anything else? Because we won't figure anything out when we open the Bible to put our words in God's mouth.
The law called the Equality Act, and every person in this room, including the babies in the back, will be impacted by this legislative depravity. There's no other word for it. There is no other word for it. And when a nation takes an act of rebellion, because that's what that man is. See, we live in a day where everything's got to be therapy. Oh, well, he has gender dysphoria. There might be a few people like that. And by the way, I'm not talking about people who have true, honest, actual genetic abnormalities, XXY, XYY, the various issues that can come up in that situation. That's a very tiny, small percentage of the human population. Very small. This man is genetically unambiguous. And when a nation can so enshrine the rebellion against God's good creative decree, so as to cause confusion on the most basic level of male and female, this must be the judgment of God upon a people. Don't be confused. This isn't what brings judgment. This is judgment. The pagan people of antiquity weren't that confused. The people who offered their children to Moloch still knew who males and females were. And so I ask you a question. In light of the text, it is a minister of God to you for good. Is the state that tells your 11-year-old daughter that she has to put up with the biological male in her restroom, at the mall, at the library? Notice I'm not saying at school because most of us have already figured this part out. Is that state a minister of God to you for good? No, it is not. No, it is not.
All right, so he's establishing the government is not a minister to good, so therefore we don't have to follow it. Okay, again, I'm just going to keep repeating the same questions over and over. Was the government at the time Paul wrote to Rome, was they a minister to good? And you could look at the things Nero and them were doing, and clearly they were not. Number two, he still tells them that government was appointed by God. Now, is the purpose of government to do good? Yes, that is. So is Paul telling them they don't have to follow that rule? Okay, I'm asking all kinds of questions. Does they have to follow that rule? Now, if you jump to 2021 and you look at what the government is doing, you say, well, the government is not a minister to good, so no longer we have to obey. How far can we take that disobedience? Hey, because they passed a law about the bathroom, dealing with bathrooms and transgender individuals, because they passed that, we don't have to follow the rule then about masks in a pandemic? Is that the logical jump here? Hey, look, they're immoral. Don't follow the rules about masks. Don't follow the rules about social distancing. Don't follow any rules. Well, then why do you pay taxes? Why is this church a 5013C tax exempt? We could probably look it up. Is it tax exempt? Why? Why do you want a tax exemption from an immoral government? Why? Get rid of your 5013C. It's an immoral government. Why? Did they take any PPP money? I don't think they did, but if they did, that would be interesting. Even MacArthur's church initially took PPP money. They gave it back. I mean, if it's an immoral government, why? Does your church follow any of the requirements for, in some churches, you have certain rules about the building. You have to have 2 exits and you have to have handicap, accessibility. Why follow any of those rules? Why follow any rules? Like, I need some clarification. Let's see. He's got time. Let's see if he's going to clarify it all.
That is a state that is saying to God, we care nothing for your law. We rebel against your law. What are you going to do about it? But if you do evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing, for it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath upon those who do what? The one who practices evil. This is the connection between here and 1 Peter. Because in 1 Peter you have doing good and doing evil. Here it is in Romans 13. An avenger who brings wrath upon the one who practices evil. Now I know what's going through most everyone's mind. Let me address it immediately. Doesn't this just mean then that we can just do whatever we want and not worry about how a society has common values or anything like that? And I think as I've been struggling with these issues, I've realized something. Now, I know that I will be misquoted here, and I know I'll be misrepresented here. Doesn't matter. I need to say what I need to say. Evangelicalism in the United States, especially since the days of Charles Finney, but through much of the revivalism and much, going to get in trouble here, of the Arminianism that marks fundamentalism in the United States, has an extremely low view of the law of God. Part of it is because, and I've said this before, we are canonically challenged. We only have 27 books in the New Testament. The 39 books of the Old Testament are basically good stories for the kids in Sunday school, or back in my day, the flannel graph. Oh, that was so good. I wonder if they still make flannel graph. I may do a sermon. No? Eric is saying no. Are you saying no, I shouldn't, or no, they don't? I am sure I could find some churches that still have flannel graph. I would, maybe we need to do a sermon using flannel graph. I think that would be awesome. Some of you are going, I have no idea what you're talking about, but you'll find out. I'm going to find a way to do a flannel graph sermon right here at Apologia. But that spectrum in the history of our nation developed the idea that the law of God, even though Paul says it's good, that the law of God, even though we know it can never bring about our justification, but is a tutor that leads us to Christ, we might be justified by faith, but that law of God that continues to lie underneath and be the foundation upon which the apostles say, you shall not do this. They can so easily quote it as if it's a given. That aspect of honoring the law, that aspect of seeing in Jeremiah and its quotation in Hebrews chapter 8, I will write my law upon their heart, that the regenerate person rejoices in God's moral law, rejoices in the guidance that it gives us to understand how we're to live in this world. That was lost. It was lost. And as a result, so much of gospel preaching did not include that emphasis upon holiness that comes from recognizing what God has said in His Word. And as a result, there has been a hesitance upon the part of many who have a high view of Scripture, but have missed its emphasis in regards to holiness and the clarity of God's revelation of His truth. And therefore, they are hesitant to bring the Word of God to bear against the culture when the culture misses and in fact begins to rebel at these very points. And now look at what we're facing. Now look at what we're facing. My parents could not possibly have imagined a day when we would be facing what we're facing with the Equality Act in the United States today. Couldn't have imagined it. How did that happen? And how is it that the church is now having to seriously think through? Now, by the way, this is not the first time. In your bulletin, you have a quotation from 1750. Okay? And despite what Luke says, I was not around in 1750. From 1750, where a minister, and let's not worry about all the rest of his theology, the point is this. He looks at Romans 13, and he says, hey, that text is about being obedient to authorities who are under the authority of God's law. They're defining good the way God defines good. They're defining evil the way God defines evil. And those authorities are to be those to whom we are in subjection. God does not want anarchy. But it has been an abuse of these texts, primarily by kings and sacral church-state relationship situations, to forget about the fact that in both of these two texts, you plainly and clearly have underlying all of it. You can't begin to understand what is being said if you don't understand that evil and good are being defined not by the state, but by God.
All right, I think that's the most concise. He said he spent all of this time to say, look, only when the government is submitted to God's law and they understand good in light of God's law and evil in light of God's law, only then you submit. Well, when has the government ever understood good and evil in light of God's law? So when the United States government supported the buying and selling of human beings as slaves, that was good and acceptable? When the country had laws that treated African Americans as second-class citizens or less than citizens and took away they couldn't use the same door, they couldn't use the same entrance, they couldn't sit in the same place, they couldn't sit here in the bus, they couldn't use the same water fountain, they couldn't, all these different things they could not do. That was good? So you're saying Trump understood good and evil in light of God's law? Are you kidding me? So at this point, when should we ever obey any law? When should we obey any government? Because so your city government, hey, your kids in their high school, hey, all the kids listening, all high school students, hey, if your school doesn't understand law in the same way God understands right and wrong, you don't have to obey your school teachers. Hey, if your parents don't understand God's understanding of right and wrong, you don't have to obey them. Just no one obey anyone, because the world is filled with people who are sinners, who are depraved, who don't understand God's law the way they're supposed to. We only submit ourselves to government who understands right and wrong in light of God's law. That's basically what he said. How far do we take this? There's so much here that I don't, and are you telling me Nero understood it that way? So look, according to him, this is the way I have to read Romans 13. Hey, guys in Rome, don't obey the government because Nero doesn't understand God's law the right way. So don't obey. But why would he say that government was appointed by God? And then again, I still don't understand how we understand this interpretation works in 1 Peter, where Peter turns around and tells them, hey, slaves, obey your masters even when they don't act in a good way, in a great way, even when they act in an evil way. Why would they have to obey how we are to understand the submission to government is we only obey the government when the government does the right thing? Hey, So according to him, we no longer have to, basically, look, he's already established that the government is evil now, so no, we don't have to obey. What rules can I disobey now? What rules? Clearly, this church doesn't believe you have to obey rules in regards to a pandemic. Don't have to wear a mask, don't have to social distance, don't follow those rules. What rules do you have to follow then? Taxes? Do I have to pay taxes? What rules? I need some answers. All right, let's finish this up.
Not by the state, but by God. And when the state decides that it is the ultimate authority, when the state arrogates to itself the authority to define good and evil, that becomes a plague upon a people. And the Christian church's duty is to speak plainly to that state, and we have one message: repent. Repent. Can you imagine how silly that sounded in the days of the apostles? This tiny little religious movement following a crucified Messiah. It's hard for us to imagine how stupid that sounded. Only the worst criminals were crucified. Only the lowest of the lowlifes were crucified. And you think this crucified person rose from the dead and is somehow going to judge the living and the dead? Yep, that was their message. A message that eventually turned the world upside down. That was their message. They really weren't looking to try to win a popularity contest. They were not in any way, shape, or form doing the math of how many votes that message was going to get, were they? No, they weren't. And that tiny little group, they led members of that tiny little group into the massive Colosseum. I've been to the Colosseum just once. What an amazing thing that was. Did you know you could move the floor out of the way and they could have sea battles in there? It's astonishing. I mean, just the architectural marvel of it is unbelievable. And what it represented, the power of Rome. And they brought people from that persecuted little religious movement, and they brought them in there and entertained the crowds by setting lions on them that would eat them alive. Eat them alive. And yet, they kept saying to Caesar himself, you will be judged because you say you are Lord. but you won't rise from the dead by your own power and authority. The one who did is going to judge you. How idiotic could a message be? And yet, like I said, I've been in the Colosseum, and guess what? It's in ruins. Amen. That huge empire has fallen. That's what history does. That's what time does. And their message to the Caesars and to the Senate and to the people of Rome came true. And every one of them will stand before the man from Nazareth because he rose from the dead. That's what God has done. And that message was true long before the language in which I am speaking to you came into existence, before this valley could even be inhabited. And here we are, gathered together, generation after generation later, bound together by our common faith and the revelation that God has given to us. That's a supernatural thing, folks. That's a supernatural thing. And so what do we see in these texts? We are not anarchists. Government is a good thing. It is ordained by God amongst men. There needs to be laws. When we get in our cars this evening, it's okay that you only drive on the right side of the road. This is a good thing. It is a proper thing. And so there are some elements of law and society that are what are called adiaphora. They're indifferent. Back when I could travel, I went to a number of places where the people drive on the wrong side of the road. Now they think we drive on the wrong side of the road. And there is not a moral good or wrong about which side of the road you drive on. Until you try to drive in England and then drive over to France, and you have to change the sides, and then it gets really crazy. And dangerous, in my opinion. But anyway. So there are things that the church does not sit back and claim to have the right to tell the state how to do every single thing that it does. There are divine revelations in God's law that define what justice is. And when the state bears the sword as servants of God, they are to enforce that which is good and punish that which is evil. And if the church has failed in anything in the United States, it's been in being very clear in telling the state where to derive those fundamental truths. The founders knew, but that's something that every generation has to be reminded of over and over. And if my generation failed you younger generations anywhere, it's because we assumed everyone would always know that. We all had that common understanding. Well, that started breaking down just before I came along. The 60s weren't all that good for that kind of stuff. The state must understand what is evil doing and what is good doing, and God determines that. God determines that. So where does that leave us now? Right now, and it's already happened, it started Friday. The media and the culture of death started their spin. Have you already noticed it? Let's take the eyes off of the child that is being torn apart. Let us take our eyes off upon that unique creation of God that is fully human, absolutely unique, never to be seen again in that form. Let's take our eyes off of that and let's focus upon anything else we can get the focus upon. Women's rights and health care and all sorts of stuff like this. Let's not talk about human sexuality in light of God's law. Let's not talk about the covenantal nature of human intercourse. Let's not talk about any of that. And so the spin has already started. And if someone asks you, well, what church do you go to? Well, I go to Apologia Church. Oh, that one? Do I really need to mention that right now I could think of numerous corporations in this valley where that could end your employment? Oh, that got serious, didn't it? You better believe it. You better believe it. And when you're challenged, when you are lied about, when you are slandered, as we saw in 1 Peter chapter 2, how are you going to respond? The temptation is to respond emotionally. The temptation is, I'm being hurt here. You are misrepresenting. You do not understand what we really believe. The idea is, I need to become defensive, rather than recognizing Jesus told me this was coming. My Lord's put me here for a reason. And if it weren't for the grace of God, I would be just as deceived as the person who's repeating the lies and slander about me to me. There is such a tremendous confidence that comes from having clarity of understanding of what God's Word says about these issues. That's why we want you to have this clarity. We cannot be in all the places you are going to be in to give answer. And if it's not about abolishing human abortion in Arizona, it will be the reality that the laws passed in the highest levels of the United States of America are going to tell you and I that if we repeat the words of Jesus from Matthew chapter 19, that he who in the beginning made them male and female, that we are evildoers. That's coming. It's almost here. And it's going to cost us. Do you hear me, brothers and sisters? It's going to cost us. Do you understand now why we have stood here over and over again repeating, this is the Word of God. This is theanustos. This is divine revelation. If you have a firm foundation to stand upon, then when the state says to you, you're an evildoer, just as the Romans said to the Christians, you're an evildoer, you won't just offer the pinch of incense. How hateful can you be? And now the state says, you can't call the 6'2", 220 person she. How hateful can you be? They said then, I can't do it because Caesar is not Lord, Jesus is. And I can't call him a her because Jesus, who is Lord, says he's a him. And so my highest authority isn't you, it's him. And he's your highest authority too, and you will stand before him to be judged. Brothers and sisters, it's going to get real fast. Did you hear what Jeff was saying earlier? Put aside your jealousies. Put aside division. Those secret sins that sap your strength. Because it's going to cost us to believe what we've said this evening. And we have to stand together. We have to stand together. They'll pick us off one by one. And we can have confidence You say, well, it sounds pretty heavy. Yes, it does. But you know what? When those Christians that I mentioned earlier were led into the Colosseum, oh, how impressive it must have been. How huge the power of Rome. And as their blood was spilled upon the sands to the applause of the pagan Romans, not only did their steadfastness result in more and more Christians and the spreading of the church, but as they walked into that Colosseum, they were confident of one thing. Every stone in this building, every animal that is going to attack us, every guard at the gates, every person in the seats was made, created, and sustained by my Lord, who will receive me into his presence in just a few moments. That's what the Lordship of Christ means. And he will accomplish his purpose and his intention in this world. And I don't have to see past where I am right now. I have his promises. I can't see how it's all going to work out. They couldn't see it then. They could not imagine that as they suffered in the dirt of the Colosseum, that there would come a day when thousands would be thronging into the Metropolitan Tabernacle in London to sing the praises of Jesus. They couldn't imagine that we would be here this evening. Oh, but could they have heard us when we sing the doxology this evening with their last breaths, knowing that they were giving their lives in service of the one who had said, I will build my church, and he has, and he will continue to do so. That has to be our conviction. That has to be our conviction. Let us pray that God will indeed help us to be faithful even unto death.
I'm just left speechless here, right? I mean, you can sit there in the emotion of all of that. Yes, no matter what happens, we have to be faithful to Christ. Amen. I'm all with that. No matter what the government does, we have to be faithful to Jesus Christ. Absolutely. If they forbid me to preach, preach. If they tell me that I can't preach, that God created them male and female, then yes, I will have to face consequences. I am in complete agreement with all of that. But the purpose of this sermon was Romans 13, and he did nothing to explain Romans 13. The best he did was tell us that Romans 13 only applies to governments that understand good and evil in light of God's law, and that they themselves submit to God's law. And if they don't do that, we don't submit to them. Well, then that leaves the idea that I don't have to follow anything they tell me then. Because again, this is a church that's not following any of the rules in regards to COVID. So if it doesn't apply to the rules in regards to COVID, why does it apply to traffic laws? Why does it apply to anything? And again, why? I don't understand. The government that was in charge of the time Paul wrote to the Romans, they were pagans. They rejected the God of the Bible. They didn't believe good and evil in that way. So is Paul literally, so the way we read Romans 13, this is the conclusion of this sermon. The way we read Romans 13 is Paul is telling them, don't submit to Nero. Don't submit to him. You don't have to because he doesn't do things right. Well, if that is true, then how do we understand 1 Peter telling the slaves to obey their masters even when their masters act in an unjust manner? I don't understand. This did nothing to clarify the text. This did nothing to explain the meaning of the text. This wasn't an exposition of the text. This wasn't a study of the text. This wasn't a sermon on the text. I don't know what this was other than to say, look, our world's really messed up because of the Equality Act and the LGBTQ transgender movement, and they're going to come for us, and we got to be ready because we're going to basically be fed to the lions, and it was an emotional appeal saying they're coming for us. They're going to pick us off one by one. They're after us. Be prepared. Okay. So why did you preach on Romans 13? What was the point of the sermon? I am so tired of hearing these sermons that are supposedly tell people they don't have to follow Romans 13, not actually dealing with Romans 13. Not actually dealing with the historical context, the text. Now, he gave the appearance that he was dealing with the historical context, but he never once again explained. So he never gave me the actual interpretation of Romans 13. The only thing I conclude based on listening to this sermon and working through this now for 3 hours is that what he is saying is that Paul wrote to the Romans to tell them not to obey Nero and not to submit to them because Nero was an unjust, ungodly pagan ruler who was not submissive to the true God and did not understand good and evil in light of that. So therefore they didn't have to follow. And Peter was writing to the people of his time saying they didn't have to follow the government. But then I don't understand why Peter would turn around and tell the slave to obey an unjust master. So it doesn't even make sense. And again, even if you, there's no way, I don't understand. Look, that I give up. Look, and you know what? Instead of being worried about the Transgender Equality Act, how come we worry about that we cannot handle Romans 13 in a meaningful way when we don't like what the government is doing? I'll end the way I started. When you open up God's word, what are you hoping to do? To hear what God has to say, understand what God has to say so that you understand his way, his will, and that you want to follow it. Are you simply opening the Bible to simply find justification for the way you already think and the way you already want to go? Well, if all you're going to do is open the Bible to find justification for the way you already want to go, don't even bother opening the Bible because you've already made up your mind. And to me, it's more evil to open up the Bible and shove your words into God's mouth so that you can justify yourself. God's words gives us lots of instructions that sometimes doesn't make any sense and I don't understand. But it's either I've got to follow what God says or don't. Turn the other cheek. I don't want to turn the other cheek. Resist not evil. I don't want to resist not evil. I want to fight back. Love my enemy. I don't want to love my enemy. Now, I can sit there and explain it all away. But I'm saying if we can explain, I just want you to understand this. So if Romans 13 means I can only submit to authority that understands God's word, understand evil and good in light of God's law, and they are submitted to God's law, then I can logically take that to any form of authority. I don't have to follow my boss. I don't have to follow the city rules, state rules, governmental rules. If your parents don't understand God's law the right way, you don't have to obey your parents. Wives, you don't have to submit to yourselves to your husbands unless they do it the right. You don't have to. At this point, we've just destroyed any submission to any authority other than Christian authority. Because the only authority that would come close to meeting that understanding right and wrong in light of God's law would be a Christian authority. So the only authority you submit to is a Christian one. But hey, we don't want anarchy. Yeah, okay. I don't know what that was. That was, if that is now quality, and I read all of the comments on YouTube when this sermon was, oh, amen, this is the best sermon I've ever heard. Everyone needs to hear this sermon on Romans 13. It's the most amazing thing. If that's the most amazing sermon you've ever heard on Romans 13, then I quit. I retire. I'm done preaching. I'm done teaching because I can't preach a sermon like that because I actually try to deal with the text. Unbelievable. That's the state of American Christianity today. Now, I'm not worried about the Equality Act and LGBTQ transgender. I'm worried about the state of the American church. And so should you. You can email me your thoughts, newsif@yahoo.com. You can tell me how much I'm garbage and how stupid I am and how ignorant I am because I don't understand how to interpret the Bible. At this point, I don't even need to know how to interpret the Bible. You know what I need to do now? Forget trying to teach the Bible. Just turn on the microphone and tell you what I think. Because whatever I think, God thinks, and I don't need to even try to prove it because I don't even have to deal with the text. That's the American Christianity. Just turn on the microphone, say whatever you want because what we want is always right. And Biden bad, Trump good. I guess I got to throw that in there as well. I'm done. I retire. I'm going home. I'm going home because I'm that frustrated. All right, newsif@yahoo.com. Newsif@yahoo.com. Yeah, I'm done. All right, I'm so discouraged. I'm basically depressed right now. You don't even understand how upset I am right now because that didn't help anyone. God help us all.